Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in this new episode of the video podcast 10 Minutes with Fleet Europe and Gavin Harvey, Global Buyer Mobility at Sodexo. Gavin, good afternoon. How are you doing?
Hi, Stephen. Very well. And yourself?
Yes, I'm doing fine. It's great to meet with you, although in a virtual setup. But we would like to know a little bit more about yourself and your strategy. So my first question is, when did you join Sodexo, and when did you become a global buyer mobility at Sodexo?
So I joined Sodexo 20 years ago as a buyer, a UK buyer. And then 8 years ago, I joined the European team as a buyer, European buyer, then a global buyer.
Um, Sodexo is, of course, a global company, and we are here in a fleet business setup. So we would like to know a little bit more about the size and the scope of your fleet at Sodexo. Can you give us some numbers? How big is your fleet in Europe and beyond Europe?
It's quite a big fleet. It's 12,000 vehicles. Now, 7,000 are in Europe, and it's split 50-50 cars, commercial. That really does vary. So some countries like Belgium, we have a lot of company cars. Other countries like the US, it will be commercial vehicles.
What are the building blocks of your strategy? What are the main elements, let's say?
Well, I've picked up this category 4 years ago. And the first thing I did, I wanted to globalize it. When I say globalize, I mean come up with preferred suppliers at a global level in terms of manufacturers and leasers. So 4 years ago, I did a tender for those two categories. And my last 4 years really has been spent on strengthening those deals and implementing.
Was it easy to find the suppliers on a global level?
We have 11 countries that represent 95% of our fleet. They have more than 300 vehicles each in those countries. So by focusing on those 11, yes, my suppliers definitely can meet my needs. Do they meet our needs globally, because we're present in over 40 countries? No, they don't, but I focus on the most important ones.
If you look back at those 8 years that you are now leading the procurement on a global level for fleet, what is the achievement you are the most proud of? And if you could, what would you do differently?
I suppose when you implement a tender, because we don't work on mandating in countries, we rely on the countries participating. So it's selling, and you don't realize how successful you are as a seller until at the end of the year, you count up all the new registrations and you go to the suppliers and you collect the bonuses and you see that pot of money every year getting larger and larger. And so I suppose that's the most rewarding part of the job. It was a two-part question. Remind me, what was the second question?
The second one was if you could do something differently,
so
what
that's
would
why I'm
it be?
Successful. Where was I unsuccessful? Well, that's a good question. What I did badly was I totally underestimated how challenging it was, because as I said, it's not my main category. I look after other categories as well. So it's I'm time poor. I needed more resource. Now I should have realized that much earlier on to get additional resource.
So this is a call out to the industry to see if someone would like to join you and your team at Sodexo.
Yes.
Okay, good. Let us talk a little bit about some of the trends that we are seeing. I can imagine that TCO is also for you very important. It's probably for most fleet managers, for sure this year, very high on the agenda. But we also see in Europe that there is, of course, the discussion around CO2 neutrality and electric vehicles. What is your stake on CO2 neutrality at Sodexo?
But the most important thing for any buyer is TCO, it's cost. And that is the number one priority. CO2, yes, number two. We have a policy of reducing CO2 emissions by 3% a year. Well, that doesn't make you CO2 neutral. So I think to go to the next stage, we're not quite there yet. You have to talk about carbon offsetting. You talk about some form of taxation. And of course, the internal taxation would persuade countries to be more active in moving to more lower CO2 emissions. But the real challenge there is that we're such a diverse organization. So it's quite easy to say, let's move to low CO2 emission cars in Europe. But when you speak to someone in Canada or someone in Australia who's operating in mines, then it's a different question altogether. So yeah, something we need to work on.
Do you already have electric cars in your fleet?
Yes, we do. Yeah, we have it as part of our car choices in many countries, and obviously hybrids as well.
You also have commercial vehicles in your fleet. There, I can imagine the fleet electrification is a little bit more challenging than with the passenger cars.
It was challenging, past tense. But this year, a lot of manufacturers have come up with some very suitable vehicles with decent ranges and decent payloads. They didn't exist a few years ago. So yeah, this is a good year for moving towards electrification of our commercial fleet.
You are officially titled Global Buyer Mobility at Sodexo. So I can imagine that you are not only looking at the company car and the vehicles, but also at new mobility solutions for your employees.
Mm.
What is your vision on smart mobility?
I think that first of all, my job title is misleading because although it says mobility, we chose that because I was looking at the time after vehicles and travel. The two go very, very well together because you're dealing with the same internal stakeholders, not just buying, but also finance and HR. What we do not do in Sodexo is have a global vision on mobility in the way you're thinking of and coming up with a mobility solution, because really that has to be done at country level, partly because of taxation varies from country to country, but most importantly, suppliers' presence varies so much. And yes, we're quite far advanced in countries. In Benelux, we're very, very mature, but I'm not quite sure about whether every country is ready yet for that.
Now, in Europe, of course, we are talking a lot about mobility. Also, the suppliers are launching more and more mobility initiatives. And we see that there is in some countries an increasing pressure on the company car in terms of taxation, regulation, and even the general perspective and awareness about those company cars. And how do you see the concept of the company car evolving?
So when I took over the category 4 years ago, I did a presentation. In this presentation, I showed some pictures, and if you Google this after this, you have a Google Piccadilly Circus London, 1908, Piccadilly Circus London, 1912, and the first picture, the older picture, you see a very, very busy London with lots of horse-drawn vehicles. And 4 years later, they'd all disappeared and been replaced by motorized vehicles. And in my presentation, I said, this is what's happening. We're at the very cusp of something big happening. And you've now got your last company car, because very soon it would be mobility, it would be electric. And I was completely wrong. I got my timing completely wrong. And I'm not even quite sure now what the world will look like in 4 years' time. It may not be very different to where we are today.
Gavin Harvey, thank you very much. Thank you for the discussion. Thank you for being so open with me and also with the audience of Fleet Europe. I hope to meet with you later this year, also face-to-face in a physical setup, of course. And to the audience, if you like this video podcast, please share it with your colleagues. And I hope to meet with you in a new episode of the 10 Minutes Video Podcast with Fleet Europe. Thank you very much and bye-bye.
Thank you.